A veteran spent his last $5,000 on a decaying farmhouse at the edge of Willow Creek, hoping to rebuild life with his son and loyal German shepherd. But when the walls began to hum like a heartbeat and the dog growled at the sealed basement door, he realized something beneath the ground was alive and listening. What started as a fresh start soon became a fight against the echoes of a forgotten experiment that refused to die. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. The morning air over Montana carried the crisp scent of pine and dust, a strange mixture of wilderness and desolation that made even the sunlight feel tired. Jack Turner guided his rust-streaked Ford pickup along the narrow road leading toward Willow Creek, one hand gripping the worn steering wheel, the other resting on his knee. The truck's engine hummed like a war veteran mumbling in its sleep, steady but scarred. Jack was 45, with shoulders that bore both the weight of years in the U.S. Army and the silent gravity of loss. His face was hard, angular, the kind shaped by desert winds and sleepless nights. Dark brown hair, flecked with gray, curled beneath the edge of his faded cap. His eyes, steel blue, deep set, had seen too much of the world's noise and now sought peace where silence still lived. His hands, though rough and calloused, moved with the soldier's precision. The thin scar running across his left knuckle was a memory of Kandahar, one he didn't talk about, even with his son. Eli sat beside him, a 12-year-old boy with untamable hair the color of wheat and a mind always busy behind curious eyes. He had inherited his mother's quiet intelligence and his father's resilience. The divorce had aged him faster than it should have. He'd learned how to read maps, fix a spark plug, and understand when not to ask questions. Today, though, he held a folded piece of paper on his lap, the property listing that had brought them here. $5,000, he said softly, tracing the faded letters with a fingertip, as if the number itself might vanish. Rex, their 7-year-old German shepherd, lay in the truck bed behind them, ears twitching with every shift of wind. His sable coat gleamed in the light, black and golden brown, like tarnished armor. The dog had served beside Jack after the war, technically retired military K-9, trained for detection, discipline, and loyalty. Rex had seen the same deserts, heard the same explosions, and slept under the same impossible stars. He had a slight limp in his back leg, a reminder of a shrapnel wound long ago, but his eyes were alert, always scanning, always ready. "End of the line," Jack murmured as they passed a crooked wooden sign that read, "Willow Creek, population 2,038. The town stretched lazily across a shallow valley, its heart beating slow. A diner, a hardware store, a gas station, and a church whose bell hadn't rung in years. Past it, beyond the paved road, a narrow gravel path wound into the hills. That was where their new home waited, a house bought for less than a used motorcycle. When they arrived, the cabin sat at the edge of the forest like a forgotten thought. 2 stories of weathered wood leaned into the wind, shingles peeling, porch sagging. The windows were clouded by age, and the paint had long surrendered to the elements. A for sale sign still hung crookedly on the fence, its white letters fading into rust. Jack shut off the engine. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the ticking of the truck's cooling engine broke the quiet. "This it?" Eli asked finally, voice small. "This is it," Jack said, his tone somewhere between acceptance and disbelief. He stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and stretched his back. The air smelled of damp pine needles and something metallic, like rain before a storm. He walked up the porch steps, testing each one until the boards groaned but didn't break. When he reached the door, he noticed the padlock had already been removed, replaced by a county sticker declaring the property cleared for sale. Inside, the house smelled of dust and stale air, but not decay. The living room was bare except for an old wood stove and a pair of curtains that fluttered in the breeze. The wallpaper, once cream, had faded to the color of old bones. There was no furniture, no sign of recent life, only footprints in the dust. Too many to count, leading nowhere. "Why'd the last owners leave?" Eli asked from the doorway. Jack ran a hand along the wall. "Said something about health problems," he muttered. Then, almost to himself, "Guess the quiet drove them nuts." At the local diner later that afternoon, a waitress named Martha Green filled 2 mugs of coffee without being asked. She was in her 50s, red-haired, fading to copper, eyes sharp with curiosity. "You're the one who bought the Benson place, aren't you?" she said, setting the mugs down. "Didn't think anyone'd take it. Folks say that house doesn't want to keep people." Jack raised an eyebrow. "House doesn't want to keep people?" She shrugged, drying her hands on a towel. "Last family moved out after 3 months. Before them, a young couple lasted 6 weeks. Said the place hummed at night. Walls shiver like it's breathing. You'll hear it, too, if you stay long enough." Eli leaned forward, wide-eyed. "Like ghosts?" Martha chuckled, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Not ghosts, kid. Some things are quieter and worse than ghosts." Jack gave a polite nod, left a tip too large for their bill, and walked out. He didn't believe in haunted houses. He'd heard mortars fall in the dark, had seen what real fear looked like. But as he and Eli drove back through the twilight, something about Martha's tone stayed with him. That night, they unloaded their few possessions, a pair of sleeping bags, some cookware, a battered toolbox, and the framed photo of Eli's mother taken long before everything fell apart. Jack hung his jacket by the door, poured dry food into Rex's bowl, and lit a single oil lamp. Electricity had been disconnected years ago. The county would reconnect it in the morning. The house felt too large for their small sounds. Wind pressed against the windows, whispering through the cracks. The wood stove popped as it heated, its glow casting long, uneasy shadows on the walls. Jack spread his sleeping bag near the hearth, motioning for Eli to do the same. "It's temporary," he said, "just till we get on our feet." Eli nodded, pulling his blanket tighter. "I kinda like it here. It's quiet." Jack smiled faintly. "Yeah, quiet's good." But when the fire dimmed, the quiet grew too thick, like air before an explosion. Somewhere beneath the floorboards a low vibration began, so faint it could have been imagination. Rex lifted his head first, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the dark corner where the floor slanted toward the cellar door. His growl started low, a warning born of instinct. Jack felt it too then. Not a sound, but a pressure, a hum too low for hearing yet heavy in the chest. He sat up slowly, one hand resting on Rex's back. "Easy," he whispered. The dog didn't move, only stared toward the cellar as if waiting for something to answer. Jack looked across the room. The cellar door, bolted and sealed with rusted hinges, vibrated once, then stilled. The hum faded, leaving behind only the ticking of the cooling stove. For a long time, Jack sat in the dark, hand on the dog's fur, eyes fixed on the door. He told himself it was wind, old pipes, the creak of settling wood. But deep down, A soldier's instinct whispered otherwise. He'd felt vibrations like that once before, back in Afghanistan when distant artillery tested the ground before the sound reached human ears. The memory sent a chill through him, one he couldn't shake. When he finally lay back down, Eli was already asleep, breathing softly. Jack stared at the ceiling until the fire burned out. Outside, the moon rose over the pines, pale and watchful. Inside, the walls were still again, too still, as if the house itself was listening. Rex didn't sleep the rest of the night. He sat by the door, eyes open, keeping guard against something his master could not yet name. The morning after their first night in the house, the air felt strangely heavy, as if the fog that crept down from the mountains had carried something with it, something old and electric. Jack Turner stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his calloused hand, eyes scanning the tree line that swayed under the wind. He had not slept. Rex lay by the steps, ears pricked, still alert from the night's unease. The dog's gaze kept drifting toward the cellar door under the kitchen window, as if the wooden boards themselves murmured secrets only animals could hear. Eli bounded outside, wearing his oversized flannel and boots too big for him. His breath formed small clouds in the cold air. "You didn't sleep again," he said, squinting at his father. "You always do that when you're thinking about Mom." Jack didn't reply. He just sipped the bitter coffee and stared at the forest until Eli gave up and went to chase Rex around the yard. The boy's laughter echoed faintly, bright but fragile, like it didn't quite belong in this place. By noon, Jack began working on the electrical lines. The county had restored power that morning, and the lights flickered weakly through the rooms like hesitant ghosts. When he opened the metal fuse box in the hallway, he noticed something odd. A secondary breaker panel, smaller, older, with military-style labeling etched into it. AUX grid, Sector 4. Dust thickened its edges. He followed the conduit, tracing it along the wall until it disappeared through a section of floor leading directly down into the cellar. The panel had been welded shut. Whoever did it had known what they were doing. The seal was neat, deliberate, not corrosion, but intent. Jack crouched beside it, running a finger over the rusted seam. The metal was warm to the touch, though the rest of the floor was cold. "Weird," he muttered. Eli appeared behind him. "What is it?" "Just some old wiring," Jack said, masking his curiosity with casualness. "Probably went to a generator or heater that's long gone." "Can we turn it on?" "No," Jack said sharply. Then, after seeing the boy's startled face, he softened. "Not yet. I need to see where it runs first." That afternoon, he drove into town for supplies, extension cords, nails, and a small gas generator just in case the old system failed. The hardware store was run by Sam Whitaker, a broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a trimmed gray beard and thick glasses that magnified his watery blue eyes. His face was weathered but kind, the sort of man who had seen enough winters to measure people like storms, quietly, patiently. "Benson House, huh?" Sam said when Jack placed the generator on the counter. His tone was mild, but his eyes sharpened. "That place still standing?" Jack nodded. "Barely." Sam rang up the sale slowly. "You keep an ear out at night. Folks round here say that land's wired funny. They built more than cabins up, there in the 60s. My brother worked with a construction team, Army contract. Said there were blueprints he wasn't allowed to keep." Jack's hands stilled on the counter. "You think it's dangerous?" Sam shrugged. "If it was, the government would have fenced it off, don't you think?" He slid the receipt across, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Still, some things hum for a reason. When Jack returned, twilight had already begun leaking through the trees. He unloaded the generator and tools, then crouched by the main breaker again. The strange secondary fuse box tugged at him like a loose thread in a soldier's mind. You could ignore it for a while, but you'd never rest easy until it was fixed. He unscrewed the top, revealing a single black switch under a layer of dust. AUX Grid, 1971, was stamped above it. He hesitated. Logic said it was nothing, just old wiring, probably disconnected decades ago. But some instinct urged him to test it, just for a moment. He switched it on. The reaction was instant. Every light in the house flickered violently. The generator outside sputtered and died. From beneath the floorboards came a deep, pulsing vibration. Steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through stone. The kitchen glasses trembled. The walls seemed to inhale, groaning as though the house itself were stretching after a long sleep. Rex barked, tail rigid, hackles raised. Eli ran in, eyes wide. "Dad, what is that?" Jack threw the switch down. The sound cut off, leaving behind only the ring in their ears. "Just a power surge," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He checked the circuit. Nothing burned, no smoke, no sign of malfunction. But when he touched the panel again, it was warm, as if something deep below had just stirred. They ate dinner in silence, the kind of silence that feels heavier than words. The soup on the table went cold before they finished. Eli fiddled with his spoon. "It felt like it came from under us," he said finally, "like the ground was moving." Jack forced a grin. Old house, loose foundation. Wind does strange things. But Eli wasn't convinced. Neither was Rex, who refused to leave the spot by the cellar door. That night, Jack lay awake again. The lamp flickered once, twice, then steadied. Outside, the forest whispered in its ancient language. Inside, the house was breathing. Soft, slow, steady. He closed his eyes, but each creak felt deliberate, each vibration measured. When he opened them again, he saw the glass of water on the nightstand rippling faintly. He rose, barefoot, careful not to wake Eli. He crossed the floorboards to the hallway and stood near the wall, pressing his ear against it. The hum was faint but clear, like the distant purr of machinery far underground. It was not random. It had rhythm. A low pulse, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats again. Morse code, maybe? He had learned enough in the army to recognize patterns. Rex padded up beside him, eyes fixed on the same spot. Jack whispered, "You hear it too, huh?" The dog whined softly. At dawn, Jack pried open the cellar entrance. It took him half an hour to cut through the rusted lock and push aside the warped wood. The smell that came out wasn't rot. It was metallic, sterile, like the inside of an old gun barrel. He shone his flashlight down the narrow stairs, dust motes swirling in the beam. The basement was empty except for a sealed steel door bolted into the far wall. Faded stencils marked it. Unit 7. Property of U.S. Army. He stood there for a long while, saw the cold seeping through his boots. Memories flickered. Desert bunkers, sealed vaults, the low hum of generators used to mask troop movements. He knew that sound. He'd heard it in the war from machines that could track heartbeats through walls. Jack turned off the flashlight and closed the hatch. He didn't tell Eli. Not yet. That evening, he returned to Martha's diner. The same red-haired woman greeted him with a skeptical smirk. "Back already?" "Yeah," Jack said, sliding onto the stool. "You ever hear anything about the army building near this town?" Martha wiped a glass. "Plenty. My brother worked in maintenance for them when I was a girl. They called it Echo Base. Nobody really knew what they did, but after a bad storm in '62, the place was sealed off. A few years later, half the crew moved away, the rest just stopped talking. The Benson house, built right over it." She met his eyes, serious now. "Why?" Jack shook his head slowly. "No reason." He finished his coffee in silence. When he returned home, Eli was asleep on the couch. Rex curled at his feet. Jack stood by the window, looking out into the black forest. The house behind him gave a low, familiar vibration, gentle, patient, almost welcoming. It was alive again. He switched off the lamp. In the darkness, the hum returned, soft, rhythmic, unmistakably human. The morning began with a fragile quiet, the kind that felt borrowed rather than earned. Mist lingered over the pines, swallowing the horizon in a pale, trembling veil. Jack Turner sat at the table staring at the coffee he hadn't touched. The house had been still all night, but that stillness felt deceptive, like the pause between a heartbeat and the next. His hands were steady, but his eyes betrayed the exhaustion of a man waiting for something to return. Eli's voice broke the silence. "Dad, the heater's not working again." The boy knelt near the old furnace, fiddling with its control panel. His face, framed by unkempt blonde hair, carried a child's determination and a hint of inherited stubbornness. He tapped at the dial with the screwdriver, brow furrowed. "I think it's this wire. It's loose." Jack rose, rubbing his temples. "Don't mess with that, kid. I'll fix it later." "I can do it," Eli insisted, glancing up with a grin. "You showed me how to test a connection, remember?" Jack started to reply, but the hum returned before he could speak. It began low, an ache more than a sound, then built until the window panes quivered. The overhead light flickered wildly. Rex barked once, sharp and panicked, tail rigid. "Eli, move!" Jack lunged forward, yanking his son away from the furnace. The room pulsed with vibration. From beneath the floor came a voice, faint and mechanical, rising from the static hum. A single word, drawn out, distorted and cold. "Listen." Jack slammed the main breaker down. The sound cut off instantly, leaving the air thick and electric. Dust drifted from the ceiling like falling ash. For a long moment, no one moved. Rex whimpered, pressing close to Eli. "What was that?" Eli whispered, eyes wide. Jack didn't answer. He grabbed the flashlight from the counter and headed toward the cellar door. The wood was cold under his palm, colder than the air around it. "Stay here," he said quietly, but Eli followed anyway, curiosity outweighing fear. The stairs groaned under Jack's boots as he descended. The air smelled metallic, damp. His flashlight beam swept across the room, empty shelves, broken crates, the concrete floor etched with decades of dust. But something had changed. In the far wall, the steel door stood like a monument to secrecy. Near its base, a small hole had been drilled. Clean, deliberate. Jack knelt, brushing his thumb around its edge. The metal around it was scorched. Someone had tried to cut through years ago, and given up. Footprints dotted the dust. One set, half faded, leading from the stairs to the door and back again. But the pattern stopped abruptly 2 steps away, as if the person had vanished mid-stride. The size and shape suggested a man's boots, Heavy-soled, military issue. Jack felt the familiar weight of dread settle in his stomach. He'd worn boots like that once. Eli's voice drifted from the stairs. "Dad, what's down? There?" Jack shone the light on the door again. "Nothing that should be," he said. The boy hesitated, then stepped closer. "You think someone broke in?" "Not recently." Jack's tone was flat. "Whoever tried didn't make it far." He examined the small drilled hole again, bringing the light closer. Inside the cavity, something faintly shimmered, like condensation or heat distortion. The air near it vibrated softly, and for a second Jack thought he heard a whisper. A memory, maybe, or an echo. "Dad?" Eli's hand tugged at his sleeve. "You're scaring me." Jack straightened, taking one last look at the steel door. "Let's go," he said quietly. "We're not supposed to be here." Back upstairs, he locked the cellar hatch and shoved a heavy cabinet in front of it. Then he sat on the couch, head in his hands. The sound of the word "listen" kept circling in his mind. He'd heard voices before, on the radio, in the chaos of war. But this had been different. It wasn't calling out, it was calling back. Later that day, a black SUV appeared on the road beyond the fence line. It didn't approach, just sat idling, half hidden behind the trees. Jack watched from the porch, one hand resting on Rex's head. The vehicle stayed for 5 minutes, then reversed and vanished down the gravel road. That night, he returned to the diner. Martha was there, as always, wiping the same counter with the same faded rag. She looked up as he entered. "You look worse than yesterday." "I've had better mornings," Jack said, sliding into a booth. "You ever see any government folks around here lately?" Martha tilted her head. "You mean like the last time?" Jack frowned. "What last time?" She sighed, sitting across from him. "About 10 years ago, 2 men in suits came asking about old records. Property maps, personnel files, stuff from Echo Base. Claimed they were updating environmental reports, left before dark. I saw one of them again the next week. Or rather, what was left of him. Truck went off the ridge road. The sheriff said it was an accident." Jack's jaw tightened. "And the other man?" "Gone," she said simply. "No one ever saw him again." Martha studied him, her eyes softening. "Jack, whatever's happening out there, whatever you found, you should leave it buried." Jack managed a faint smile. "You sound like my commanding officer." "He was probably right, too," she replied, standing. When he returned home, the house felt different again. Warmer, somehow, as if the walls themselves retained the pulse from earlier. He found Eli asleep on the couch, Rex curled protectively at his feet. Jack draped a blanket over them and walked to the breaker box. The switch for the auxiliary grid was still off, yet the panel emitted a low vibration beneath his fingertips. He placed his palm flat against it. The metal was warm. He followed the sensation through the wall, step by step, until he reached the kitchen. The hum grew louder, not external, but internal, like it had taken root inside the house itself. His reflection trembled faintly in the window pane. "Listen," the word whispered again, faint as breath. He froze. It hadn't come from the cellar this time. It had come from inside the wall behind him. Jack spun, flashlight sweeping the room. Nothing. Only the tick of the old clock and the faint rattle of wind through the chimney. But the whisper lingered, not in the air, but in his skull, an after-image of sound. He leaned against the counter, exhaling. His mind flicked back to Afghanistan, to the long nights in forward posts when the radio static would mimic voices, ghost frequencies carrying fragments of old transmissions. Soldiers used to say the desert remembered its dead. Maybe this place did too. He walked quietly to Eli's side, kneeling beside the couch. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Jack brushed a hand through his hair, whispering, "You're okay, kid." But his eyes drifted to where? Toward the cellar. "We'll keep it that way." Outside, the rain began again, soft, endless, and rhythmic. Inside, the hum returned to match it, steady and patient, as if the earth itself was breathing just beneath their feet. Jack stayed awake until dawn, sitting in the chair by the window, the letter from Thomas Reed open on his lap. The final line stared back at him. "Do not attempt to destroy it. Do not power it again." He looked toward the locked cellar, where faint light flickered through the cracks like the pulse of a sleeping heart. By late morning, the air had turned clear and cold, the kind of October day when every sound carried too far. Jack Turner stood in the yard splitting firewood, sweat darkening the back of his flannel. Each swing of the axe came with precision, anger restrained by habit. The hum beneath the house had stopped for 2 nights now, but silence no longer comforted him. He had learned that quiet could mean waiting. Rex lay nearby, head on his paws, eyes tracking every movement, as if guarding the ground itself. The crunch of gravel drew Jack's attention. A dark SUV rolled slowly up the drive and stopped near the porch. 2 men stepped out, both in neatly pressed suits, their shoes too clean for country roads. The first was tall and lean, with a narrow, angular face and a faint scar running from his temple to his jaw. His hair was trimmed military short, streaked with silver, and his expression was unreadable. The second was shorter, heavier, with thinning blonde hair and the restless energy of someone unused to standing still. They looked like federal agents, clean, unhurried, and dangerous in their calm. "Mr. Turner?" the tall one asked, flashing a badge that caught the sunlight. The emblem read, Department of Energy, Division of Environmental Safety. His voice was smooth, practiced, and detached. "I'm Agent Collins. This is my associate, Agent Doyle. We're investigating a signal interference detected in this sector." Jack leaned on the axe handle. "Signal interference? Out here?" Doyle gave a quick, humorless grin. "Radar distortion. Could be geological. Could be electrical. Could be civilian equipment if someone's running unregistered systems. I don't run anything but a generator and a coffee maker," Jack said. Collins smiled thinly. "Then this will be quick. We'd like to check your property for any magnetic anomalies. Purely routine." Jack studied them for a moment. Their car still idled. A small black antenna on its roof pulsed with faint red light. "Sure," he said finally, "but you won't find much except mice and mold." Inside, he watched as the agents moved through the rooms with handheld scanners, compact devices that emitted soft beeps and flickering green lights. Doyle swept the walls methodically, pausing near the kitchen as his device let out a sharp tone. "Here," he said quietly, "reading's spiking." Collins joined him, glancing at the panel behind the refrigerator. Jack's stomach tightened. It was the same wall that led to the sealed breaker, the one connected to Echo. Collins knelt, running the scanner in slow circles. "Old wiring," he murmured, "but active. Strange frequency, around 17 hertz. That's low, even for a fault line." He turned to Jack. You said you reconnected the power grid yourself? Jack met his gaze. That's right. I used to work maintenance for the Army. I know what I'm doing. Doyle raised an eyebrow. Army, huh? Where'd you serve? Kandahar, twice. That silenced him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Collins straightened, slipping his scanner back into his coat. We might need to revisit later, Mr. Turner. If you hear or see anything unusual, flickering lights, vibrations, contact us. Jack crossed his arms. What kind of vibrations? Collins's eyes flickered with something almost like recognition. You'd know if you felt them. They left soon after, the SUV rolling back down the drive. But just before the car disappeared around the bend, Jack saw Collins glance at the rearview mirror, straight at the house. He didn't like it. Not the way they spoke, not the way their equipment hummed at the exact pitch of the sound beneath his floor. He returned inside, lifted the refrigerator away from the wall, and pried open the panel. The auxiliary breaker was still off, yet the wires vibrated faintly under his fingers, like something alive waiting for current. That evening, Jack unfolded the map Thomas Reed had drawn in his letter. The paper was thin and creased, but the lines were precise. Tunnels, sealed corridors, circular chambers labeled with cold precision. Unit 7, Primary Frequency Node. The X marking his property sat directly above it. If the map was accurate, the machine wasn't just under the cellar. It extended hundreds of meters below, deep into the mountain bedrock. Eli appeared at the doorway, barefoot, rubbing his eyes. Dad, were those men cops? Jack folded the map. Something like that. They made Rex nervous. The boy hesitated. Are we in trouble? Jack forced a smile. No, kid. They just think we've got a noisy house. Eli didn't look convinced, but he nodded and went back to bed. Rex followed, though he paused at the cellar door, growling softly before trotting after the boy. As night fell, Jack sat by the window, cigarette glowing between his fingers. His reflection looked older than he remembered, eyes hollowed by fatigue. The forest beyond was still, but a faint red light flickered among the trees. The SUV again, parked half a mile away, hidden but not gone. He watched it for a long time, until the glow finally vanished. Around midnight, the hum returned. It began as a vibration in the floor, then spread through the walls until every beam trembled. Jack rose, heart pounding. The porch light outside flared to life, though the switch remained off. The kitchen lamp flickered, casting shadows that pulsed in rhythm with the low-frequency thrum. He checked the breaker box, still off. Every logical explanation crumbled. The sound deepened, resonant enough to shake dust from the rafters. Jack pressed a hand against the wall. The vibration seemed to pulse under his palm, almost alive. And beneath it, so faint he might have imagined it, came the echo of voices layered over each other, whispering in fractured cadence. Read, system, feedback, listen, Rex barked from the hallway, fur standing on end. Eli's frightened voice called out, Dad? Jack turned off every lamp, plunging the house into darkness. The only light came from the window, the porch bulb flickering like a heartbeat. The sound built once more, then cut off suddenly, leaving silence so dense it felt physical. The bulb shattered. When dawn came, the air smelled of ozone and burnt metal. Jack walked outside, scanning the tree line. Tracks marred the mud by the fence. Fresh tire marks, heavy and patterned, government issue. The agents had returned sometime during the night. He crouched, touching the imprint, recognizing the tread of tactical vehicles he hadn't seen since the war. He stood there for a long time, watching the horizon lighten. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants, and somewhere beneath them, something was awake. By the time dawn bled across the valley, the air felt charged, as if the earth itself held its breath. Jack Turner hadn't slept. The porch light remained shattered, and the smell of burnt insulation still clung to the walls. He sat by the window, cigarette trembling between his fingers, eyes fixed on the tree line where tire tracks scarred the mud. Somewhere out there, the men from the Bureau were watching, waiting. Rex paced the room, restless, nails clicking against the floor. Eli slept upstairs, exhausted after a night of whispered thunder that wasn't thunder at all. Jack glanced at the old letter spread across the table, the one from Thomas Reed. The ink had begun to smudge where his thumb pressed the same line over and over. If it wakes, it will not stop. Use purge. He rose slowly, every movement heavy with resolve. He packed a flashlight, his combat knife, and the small radio he had used in Afghanistan, a relic, but reliable. Rex followed silently, tail low, body tense. The dog's fur along his spine stood bristled, instinct sensing danger long before human reason did. Jack opened the cellar door. Cold air rolled up like a warning, metallic and sour. He descended step by step, the light cutting through dust that swirled like ash. At the bottom, the steel door loomed in the darkness. It was half open now, its hinges twisted by age or force. Something had already pried it loose, either human or time itself. He stepped inside. The beam of his flashlight revealed a circular chamber lined with concrete panels, each marked with faint stenciling. Unit 7, property of U.S. Army 1973. In the center stood a massive steel column rising from floor to ceiling, cables coiling from its base like black veins. The air buzzed faintly, vibrating the fillings in his teeth. Rex whimpered, pressing against Jack's leg. On a side console, coated in decades of dust, sat an array of switches and levers, their labels almost erased. But one stood out, clean and distinct, as if it had been polished recently. A small brass toggle marked Purge Mode. Jack brushed the dust away. The surrounding dials were dead, but the toggle gleamed. He remembered Reed's words. If Echo activates, there is no off switch, only purge. He hesitated. He was no engineer, just a soldier who'd learned to follow orders. But in his gut, he knew this wasn't just a machine. It was something that had evolved, absorbing energy, mimicking frequencies, maybe even learning. Rex growled. Jack turned off the flashlight for a moment and listened. Beneath the silence, the hum had returned. Faint, rhythmic, patient. Then he heard it again. Voices, not human but layered and warped, crawling out of the vibrations. Thomas, Reed, protocol, error. Jack's breath caught. The voice was synthetic, fragmented, but it spoke English. "Who's there?" he demanded, though he didn't expect an answer. The hum deepened. The lights in the chamber, old, dead bulbs, flickered to life for the first time in half a century. The steel column pulsed with dull red light, throbbing like a heartbeat. Jack backed toward the console. "No more," he muttered. "You've done enough." He reached for the purge switch, but a noise upstairs froze him. Engines. Tires crunching over gravel. He ran up the stairs, Rex bounding beside him. Through the kitchen window, he saw the black SUV parked again. The men had returned, this time with equipment, large cases, antennas, and what looked like portable signal dampeners. Collins stood near the vehicle, his face set in the same unreadable calm. Doyle carried a radio, speaking rapidly into it. Jack opened the door. "You boys really don't take a hint." Collins looked up. "Mr. Turner," he called, voice steady, "we need access to your basement. You've interfered with federal property." "Property?" Jack's tone was sharp. "You mean that thing under my house?" Doyle stepped forward, cautious but firm. "That thing is a military prototype. It's reactivated itself. We're here to contain it before it escalates." Jack's grip tightened on the doorframe. "You mean before it tells people what it really is?" Collins didn't deny it. His jaw flexed once. "You don't understand. This system was designed to transmit through Earth, but it began transmitting something else. Emotional resonance, neural interference. It changes people who stay near it. That's why everyone before you left." Jack exhaled slowly. "And you think you can control it?" Collins' eyes hardened. "We don't control it. We erase it." The conversation broke when Rex began to bark furiously, facing the open cellar. A low vibration rippled through the ground. Jack saw the men's instruments flash red. The SUV's headlights flickered. "It's waking up," Doyle shouted. Collins motioned toward the house. "Back away, Turner, now!" But Jack didn't move. He ran for the cellar, ignoring their shouts. He descended the steps 2 at a time, Rex on his heels. The hum now filled the entire structure, a living frequency pressing against his chest. The steel column glowed brighter, its cables thrumming. Jack reached the console. The toggle for purge mode waited, untouched. He took one last breath and pulled it down. The world convulsed. A deafening wave of sound burst through the chamber, not noise, but pressure. Every surface shivered, every molecule of air screamed. Above him, he heard glass shatter, engines stutter, and men yelling before their voices were swallowed by the roar. The lights flared white. Jack shielded his eyes as the machine released a pulse, a single, perfect frequency that cut through everything, pure and endless. For a moment, he felt weightless, the walls dissolving into vibration. Then silence. When the light faded, he was on his knees. The machine stood dark and motionless. Smoke rose from the cables. The red glow vanished. He touched the steel column. It was cold again. Upstairs, footsteps pounded. He climbed out, coughing. Outside, the SUV's windshield was shattered. The radio antennas bent at impossible angles. Collins and Doyle lay on the ground, stunned but alive, struggling to stand. "What did you do?" Collins rasped. Jack looked toward the sky. The air felt clean again, the tension gone. "I ended it." Doyle cursed under his breath. "You have no idea what you've done. That signal, if it spread." But Collins stopped him, pressing a hand to his earpiece. Static hissed. "No transmission," he said softly. "It's gone." They left without another word, dragging their damaged equipment to the car. Jack watched them drive off, taillights flickering until they disappeared into the forest road. Rex limped over, leaning against Jack's leg. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady. Jack knelt, running a hand through his fur. "It's over, boy," he whispered, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure. The world was quiet now, but it was the kind of quiet that comes after a scream. He turned back to the house. In the basement, faint wisps of steam rose from the cracks in the concrete. One of the panels on the wall had buckled slightly, revealing a new fissure beneath. From the darkness within came a final, dying echo, soft, almost tender. "Listen." And then nothing. Morning came gray and slow, spreading through the valley like a reluctant confession. The air still carried a metallic tang, and faint smoke rose from the cracks of the basement door. Jack Turner stood in the kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, watching the steam curl upward. His hands, calloused and scarred from both war and years of repairs, trembled slightly as he poured water into a dented metal mug. The entire cabin smelled of ozone and burnt dust. Rex lay near the doorway, tail limp but eyes open, the sable fur around his neck slightly singed from last night's surge. Eli sat by the window, knees drawn to his chest, tracing a finger along the condensation that had formed on the cold glass. The silence felt heavier than the hum had ever been. For the first time since they moved in, there was no vibration under the floorboards, no pulse in the walls. The house seemed dead, exhausted maybe, like an old machine finally allowed to rest. Jack exhaled, his breath visible in the chill morning air. He looked older today. The stubble on his jaw had turned more gray than brown overnight. The veins in his hands stood out sharply as he gripped the mug, the faint tremor of a man who'd spent too long fighting battles no one else could see. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "We're leaving." Eli looked up. "For good?" Jack nodded. His son's eyes, clear, blue-gray like the mountain sky, searched his face for something certain, something final. Jack gave him a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, for good." They worked in silence. The duffel bags filled with what little they owned, a few clothes, a handful of tools, the battered photo of Jack's unit from Kandahar, and Eli's red notebook, filled with sketches of dogs, trees, and strange circular patterns that resembled the metal truss in the basement. The boy slipped it into his backpack without a word. Rex followed them from room to room, his movement slower than usual, but his gaze alert, protective. The 7-year-old German shepherd had been through combat zones with Jack, trained to detect mines and human distress alike. He still responded to commands with quiet obedience, though his eyes now carried the same fatigue as his owner's. When Jack descended the basement steps one last time, the smell hit him first, a mix of scorched insulation and old machinery. The central truss of Echo was nothing more than a melted column now, its cables fused into black vines that crawled along the floor. The console had exploded outward, scattering metal shards across the concrete. It looked less like a machine now and more like a carcass, something that had once been alive. He crouched, running a hand over the charred steel. For a moment, he thought he felt warmth beneath the surface, but when he pressed his palm closer, there was only cold. Still, the faint hum seemed to linger in the bones of the place, like the echo of a memory that refused to die. When he climbed back up, he found Martha Hensley standing in the yard. She was a sturdy woman in her late 50s, with sun-freckled skin and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Her gray hair was tied back in a practical bun, and her coat carried the smell of the small grocery she ran in town: coffee, flour, and sawdust. She held an old folder under her arm, its corners frayed and yellowed. "I figured you might want this before you go," she said. Jack wiped his hands on his jeans. "What is it?" "Something I found in the town archive. My husband used to work for the county before he passed. These files were labeled Echo Station, Decommissioned, 1974. Thought you'd find the name familiar." Jack took the folder. Inside were carbon copies of government reports, faded photographs, and a memo signed Thomas Reed, engineer and officer. The final page caught his attention. System may retain emotional frequencies of individuals within its radius. Possible neuroacoustic imprinting observed. Recommend indefinite shutdown. He stared at the sentence until the words blurred. So it didn't just transmit signals, he murmured. It stored them. Martha nodded, studying him. That thing down there wasn't just metal and wire, was it? Jack closed the folder. No, it was listening. For a long moment, neither spoke. Wind brushed through the pines, carrying the faint scent of rain. The sun had begun to rise behind the ridge, staining the valley gold. Martha's gaze softened. You're doing the right thing, Jack. Some places don't want to be lived in. He looked toward the cabin, its windows cracked, its wood charred along the edges. Maybe some places just remember too much, he said. Eli came outside carrying his backpack, Rex trotting behind him. The boy looked at Martha, shy but polite. Thank you for the bread you gave us, he said. It was the best part of being here. Martha chuckled. You're a sweet kid. You take care of your dad, all right? Eli nodded. Jack shook her hand, firm, rough palms meeting softer ones, and then turned toward the truck. The old Chevy coughed before starting, a sound that somehow felt comforting in its normalcy. Before climbing in, Jack glanced back one last time. The cabin stood still among the tall grass, sunlight glinting off the broken glass of the front window. In that moment, it looked almost peaceful. But as the wind shifted, he saw the siding tremble slightly, the faintest shiver, like an old lung taking a shallow breath. He froze. Dad? Eli called from the passenger seat. Jack looked again. The movement had stopped. Just a trick of the wind, he told himself. Still, the back of his neck prickled. Nothing, he said, forcing a smile. Let's go. They drove through Willow Creek's empty main street, past the boarded-up diner, the rusted water tower, and the general store where Martha now stood in the doorway watching them leave, though. Morning sun spilled across the fields, painting them in soft gold. The silence in the cab was heavy, but not oppressive. For the first time in months, it wasn't filled with the hum. After several miles, Eli spoke quietly. Dad? Yeah? Do you think it's gone now? For good? Jack hesitated, eyes on the winding road ahead. I think it's resting, he said finally. And we're going to let it rest. Eli nodded, satisfied with that answer. He leaned his head against the window and watched the trees blur by. Rex shifted in the back seat, laying his head on Jack's armrest, eyes half closed. The world outside grew brighter as they crossed the last ridge, the cabin shrinking to a dot behind them. Jack kept one hand on the wheel, the other drumming unconsciously against the steering column in rhythm with something only he could hear. The echo of a pulse, a memory. By the time they reached the open highway, the valley behind them had fallen completely silent. The cabin stood alone, still and unbreathing, surrounded by tall grass swaying gently in the morning wind. And if anyone had been close enough to listen, they might have heard, faint and fleeting, a soft vibration deep under the earth, one final heartbeat before true silence settled in. In a world filled with noise, sometimes silence is the true miracle. Jack didn't just turn off a machine. He silenced the echoes of fear, grief, and human pain that lingered for half a century. Maybe that's what faith really is. Not the absence of struggle, but the courage to face what haunts us, and to trust that somewhere above, God still listens. Every heart leaves a frequency behind, a small vibration of love, of loss, of kindness. And if we choose to listen with grace, perhaps that's how miracles begin. So tonight, take a moment to thank the Lord for the quiet places in your life, for the peace after the storm, for the healing after the hurt, because even in silence He speaks. If this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment and tell us what part stayed with you the most. Subscribe for more stories of hope, faith, and the small miracles that still happen every day. And may God bless you and all those you love with peace deeper than any sound.